Impermanence. All experience phenomena, whether physical or mental, inner or outer, are impermanent. This is one of the most fundamental teachings of the Buddha, and the second-to-last sentence he uttered before he died. All phenomena are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. In his last words, he said everything you need to know to do insight practices. Things come and go. Nothing lasts for even a microsecond. Absolute transience is truly the actual nature of experiential reality. What do I mean by experiential reality? I mean the universe of sensations that you directly experience. There are many gold standards for reality. However, when doing insight practices, the only useful gold standard for your reality is your own sensate experience. From the conventional perspective, things are usually believed to exist even when you no longer experience them directly, and are thus inferred to exist with only circumstantial evidence to be relatively stable entities. Predictability is confused with continuity of existence. For our day-to-day lives, this assumption is functional and adequate. For example, you could close your eyes, put down this book or device, and then pick it up again where you left it without opening your eyes. From a pragmatic point of view, this book was where you left it, even when you were not directly experiencing it. However, when doing insight practices, it happens to be much more useful to assume that things are only there when you experience them and not when you don't. Thus, the gold standard for reality when doing insight practices is the sensations that make up your reality in that instant. Sensations that are not there at that time are not presumed to exist, and thus only sensations arising in that instant do exist, with exist clearly being a problematic term, given how transient sensations are. In short, most of what you assume as making up your universe doesn't exist most of the time, from a purely sensate point of view. This is exactly, precisely, and specifically the point. Knowing this directly leads to freedom. For you philosophers in the crowd, this is basically British empiricism taken to its logical extreme and then hardwired through repeated practice. I think the great Scot David Hume would have loved the assumptions of insight practices. I am in no mood to debate questions of ontology, but for the specific task of progressing in insight practice, this empirical extreme simply works. Thus, I view empiricism through a utilitarian lens and recommend you do likewise when doing insight practices. Accept that things you do not experience directly do not exist in that moment. When doing basically everything else, accept they probably do. Those sets of assumptions lead to better outcomes, and better outcomes are my primary objective. Regarding impermanence, it is wise to reflect on our own mortality, a common reflection in many Buddhist traditions, for it is useful and true. It is a reflection on ordinary reality, and thus an aspect of training in morality that is commonly used to develop motivation to train in insight. I gained some dharmic benefits and relative insights from the 160 hours we spend in medical school dissecting a corpse down to shreds. However, when practicing insight meditation, it is far better to perceive one sensation arise and pass away. What do I mean by this? I mean that sensations arise out of nothing, do their thing, and vanish utterly. Gone. Entirely gone. Then the next sensation arises, does its thing, and disappears completely. That's the stuff of modern physics, we might say. What does that have to do with practice? It has everything to do with practice. We can experience this because the first set of vibrations we have access to isn't actually that fast. Vibrations? That's right, vibrations. That's what this first characteristic means. That sensate reality vibrates, pulses, appears as discrete particles, is like TV snow, the frames of a movie, a shower of vanishing flower petals, or however you want to say it. Some people can get all into complex wave or particle models here, but do yourself a favor and don't. Just examine your actual experience, especially something nice and physical like the motion and sensations of the breath in the abdomen, the sensations of the tips of the fingers, the lips, the bridge of the nose, beneath the nose and above the lip, or the subtle tingling on the scalp, and so on. Instant by instant, try to know when the actual physical sensations are there and when they are not. It turns out they are not there a good bit of the time, and even when they are changing constantly. We are typically quite sloppy about distinguishing between physical and mental sensations, memories, mental images, and mental impressions of other physical or mental sensations. These two kinds of sensations alternate, one arising and passing, and then the other arising and passing, in a quick but perceptible fashion. Being clear about exactly when the physical sensations are present will begin to clarify their slippery counterparts, flickering mental impressions, that help co-create the illusion of continuity, stability, or solidity. Immediately after the physical sensation arises and passes is a discrete pulse of reality, that is, the mental knowing of that physical sensation, here referred to as mental consciousness, as contrasted with the problematic concept of awareness in Part 5. By physical sensation, I mean the 5 senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And I guess you could add some proprioceptive, other extended sensate abilities, and perhaps a few others. But for traditional purposes, let's stick to these 5. This habit of creating a mental impression following any of the physical sensations is the standard way the mind operates on phenomena that are no longer actually there, even mental sensations such as seemingly auditory thoughts, that is, mental talk, our inner voice, intentions, and mental images. It's like an echo, a resonance. The mind forms a general impression of the object, and that is what we can think about, remember, and process. Then there may be a thought or an image that arises and passes, and then, if the mind is stable, another physical pulse. Since I just used this dangerous term, mind, I should quickly mention that it cannot be located. I'm certainly not talking about the brain, which we have never experienced, since the standard for insight practices is what we can directly experience. As an old Zen monk once said to a group of us in his extremely thick Japanese accent, "Some people say there is mind. I say there is no mind, but never mind. Heh heh heh." However, I will use this dangerous term mind often, or even worse, our mind. But just remember when you read it that I have no choice but to use conventional language, and that in fact there are only utterly transient mental sensations. Truly, there is no stable, unitary, discrete entity called mind that can be located. By doing insight practices, we can fully understand and appreciate this. If you can do this, we'll get along just fine. Each one of these sensations, the physical sensation and the mental impression, arises and vanishes completely before another begins. So it is possible to sort out which is which with relatively stable attention dedicated to consistent precision and to not being lost in stories. This means that the instant you have experienced something, you can know that it isn't there anymore, and whatever is there is a new sensation that will be gone in an instant. There are typically many other momentary sensations and impressions interspersed with these, but for the sake of practice, this is close enough to what is happening to be a good working model. Engage with the preceding paragraphs. They are the basis of great insight practice. Given that you now know that sensations are vibrating, pulsing in and out of reality, and that, for the sake of practice, every sensation is followed directly by a mental impression, you now know exactly what you are looking for. You have a clear standard. If you are not experiencing it, then stabilize the mind further and develop more clarity about exactly when and where there are physical sensations. Spend time with this, as long as it takes. The whole goal is to experience momentariness directly, that is, things flickering, and what those things are doesn't matter one bit. How freeing! Interpretation is particularly useless in insight meditation, so you don't have to spend time doing it when you are on the cushion. Throughout this book, I recommend reflecting on spiritual teachings and how to bring them to bear on life when off the cushion. Thoughts, even supposedly good ones, are just too slippery and seductive most of the time, even for advanced meditators. Though if you can avoid getting lost in their content, they are as valid a stream of sensate objects for insight practices as any other. When doing insight practices, try to limit yourself to no more than a few minutes of skillful reflection per hour of meditation. This should be more than enough. There are simply no substitutes for this sort of momentum in practice. If you can get that reflection down to no minutes at all, so much the better. How fast are things vibrating? How many sensations arise and vanish each second? This is exactly what you are trying to experience, but some very general guidelines can provide faith that it can be done and perhaps point the way as well. Begin by assuming we are initially talking about 1 to 10 times per second. This is not actually that fast. Try tapping 5 to 10 times per second on a table or something. It might take 2 hands, but it's doable, isn't it? You could experience that, couldn't you? That's the spirit. Not good at counting beats per second? Here's a quick trick. If you count 1/1000 at a steady pace, that is about 1 second per 1/1000. Notice that it has 4 syllables, so you are counting at 4 syllables per second, or 4 hertz, which is the unit of occurrences per second. If you tapped your hand each time you said or thought a syllable, that would be 4 taps per second. Try it. Count 1/1000 and tap with each syllable. So you now know you can experience at least 8 things in a second. You experience the 4 syllables and the 4 taps that went along with them. You probably experienced all sorts of other things too, like sights, sounds, other physical sensations, and a lot more during that 1 second. Yay! That is insight practice. You are already up to at least 8 sensations per second. Yay you! Let's say you tapped twice per syllable. That would already be up to at least 12 things you perceived in a second, the 4 syllables and the 8 taps. That actually isn't that hard to do. You are already fast enough to really bust out some insight practices. Great job! Investigate reality that fast, and you will learn some seriously cool things. Add in noticing the intentions to tap each of those taps, and the mental impressions of all of the sensations you just experienced, and suddenly you are rocking it like a boss in the world of insight meditation. There are faster and slower vibrations that may show up, some very fast, maybe up to 40 times per second or so, and some very slow, that are actually made up of faster vibrations. But let's just say that 1 to 10 times per second can sometimes be a useful guideline in the beginning. Once you get the hang of it, the faster and slower vibrations are no big deal. Alternately, depending on how you practice, conceiving of this as like a shower of raindrops, an animated pointillist painting, or 3D TV snow might help. Reality is quite rich and complex, and thus the frequencies of the pulses of reality can be somewhat chaotic, but they tend to be more regular than you might expect. Also, there are not any magic frequencies. Whatever frequency or pulse or whatever you are experiencing at that moment is the truth of that moment. However, in the beginning, you should go for faster vibrations over slower ones, and then later try for broader and more inclusive ones over those that are narrower. Don't worry if things look or feel solid sometimes. Just be with the solidity clearly and precisely, but not too tightly, and that pattern of sensations that implies solidity can start to reveal its impermanence. Be aware of each exact moment in which you experience solidity and its beginning and ending. Remember that each experience of solidity is a discrete, impermanent sensation. Also, Some people find things like counting frequencies and using numbers totally annoying, so if you are one of those, just ignore those parts, as direct experience is the key, regardless of whether you can count beats well. Still, the general concept that you are looking for something changing moderately fast, but still quite manageable, is key. Let it go, as those kooky Buddhists sometimes say. Many people begin practicing and really want to solidify something like the breath so that they can finally pay attention to it. They become frustrated when they have a hard time finding the breath or their body. The reason they can't find these is not that they are a bad meditator, but that they are having direct insight into how things actually are. Unfortunately, overemphasizing the theory and concepts of concentration practice, which aims to perceive the meditation object as more solid and stable, creates much needless frustration for the insight practitioner who doesn't know better. You should now be able to avoid a lot of that frustration and begin to appreciate why knowing some theory about the difference between insight and concentration practices is helpful. It is also worth noting here that the frequency or rate of vibrations may change often, either getting faster or slower, and that it is worth trying to perceive clearly the beginning and ending of each vibration or pulse of reality. These are actually at least two different sensations. It is also useful to check out exactly what happens at the bottom, middle, and top of the breath if you are using the breath as an object, and to examine if the frequency remains stable or changes in each phase of the breath. Finding the exact end of the out-breath is a commonly used exercise of great profundity once mastered. Never assume that what you have understood is a final, fixed answer. Be alert. Explore carefully and precisely with openness and acceptance. This is the door to understanding. One last thing about vibrations. Exploring vibrations can be a lot like any other sport. We can think of it the same way as we would of surfing or playing tennis, and this playful game-like attitude can help a lot. We're out to bust some vibrations, as Kenneth enthusiastically put it. You don't quite know what the next return or wave is going to be like, so pay attention. Keep the mind on the pulse of the sensations of your world, just as you would on the wave or ball, and keep playing. I highly recommend this sort of speed in practice, not only because that is how fast we must perceive reality to awaken, but also because trying to experience 1 to 10 sensations per second is challenging and engaging. Because it is challenging and engaging, we will be less prone to getting lost in thoughts rather than doing insight practices. Our minds have the power to perceive things extremely quickly, and we actually use this power all the time to do things such as read this book. If you don't use that massive resolving power, you are likely to quickly get really bored and wander off to something more interesting. You can probably read many words per second. If you can do this, you can certainly do insight practices. If you can perceive 1 sensation per second, try for 2. If you can perceive 2 unique sensations per second, try to perceive 4. Keep increasing your perceptual threshold in this way until the illusion of continuity shatters. In short, when doing insight practices, constantly work to perceive sensations arise and pass as quickly and accurately as you possibly can. With the spirit of a race car driver who is constantly aware of how fast the car can go and still stay on the track, stay on the cutting edge of your ability to see the impermanence of sensations quickly and accurately. I will relate 4 of the many little exercises that I have found useful for jump-starting and developing insight into impermanence. They will demonstrate how we can be creative in exploring our reality precisely, but please don't think of them in some dogmatic way. These objects and postures are not that important, but understanding impermanence directly is. In one of these exercises, I sit quietly in a quiet place, close my eyes, put my right hand on my right knee, my left hand on my left knee, and concentrate just on my 2 index fingers. Basic Dharma theory tells me that it is not possible to perceive both fingers simultaneously, so, with this knowledge, I try to see in each instant which one of the two fingers' physical sensations are being perceived at any given moment. Once the mind has sped up a bit and become more stable, I try to perceive the arising and passing of each of these sensations. I may do this for half an hour or an hour, just staying with the sensations in my two fingers and perceiving when each sensation is and is not there. This might sound like a lot of work, and it can be until the mind settles into it. It requires the concentration of a fast sport like table tennis. This is such an engaging exercise and requires such precision, making it hard to get lost in thought if I am really applying myself. I have found this to be a very useful practice for developing momentary concentration and debunking the illusion of continuity. You can pick any two aspects of your experience for this exercise, be they physical or mental. I generally use my fingers only because through experimentation, I have found that it is easy for me to perceive the sensations that make them up. In another related exercise, I do the same sort of thing, sit quietly in a quiet place with eyes closed, but instead I concentrate on the sensations of the front and back of my head, with the knowledge that the illusion of a separate perceiver is partially supported by one impermanent sensation incorrectly seeming to perceive another impermanent sensation which it follows, such as the sensations in the back of the head incorrectly seeming to perceive the sensations of the front of the head. I try to be really clear about these sensations and when they are and are not there. I try to be clear if the sensations in the head are from the front or the back of the head in each instant, and then try to experience clearly the beginning and ending of each individual sensation. You can also do this with the sides of the head, as well as the sensations that seem to be in the middle of your head. This practice also requires a table tennis-like precision. Half an hour to an hour of this can be quite a workout until the mind speeds up and becomes more stable, but this sort of effort pays off. As I mentioned above, when I am engaged with this practice, there is little room to be lost in thought. I have also found this a very useful practice for developing concentration and for debunking the illusions of continuity and of a separate self. More on that later. A few have reported that this exercise makes them nauseous or dizzy, which may come from applying too much effort and not gently allowing these sensations to just reveal themselves easily and naturally. If that happens to you, be gentle and let the sensations of the front and back of the head show themselves to you naturally. In another exercise, which is quite common to many meditation traditions, I sit quietly in a quiet place, close my eyes, and bring my attention to the breath. More than just concentrating on it, I know that the sensations that make up the concept, breath, are each impermanent, lasting only an instant. With this knowledge, I try to see how many individual times in each part of the breath I can perceive the sensations that make up the breath. During the in-breath, I try to experience it as many times as possible, and try to be precise about exactly when the in-breath begins and ends. More than this, I try to perceive exactly and precisely when each sensation of motion or physicality of the breath arises and passes. I then do the same for the out-breath, paying particular attention to the exact end of the out-breath and then the beginning of the new in-breath. I don't worry about how I am breathing because it is not the quality of the breath that I'm concerned with, or even what the sensations are, but one aspect of the ultimate nature of these sensations, their impermanence, their arising and passing away. I also don't care much about exactly where I am experiencing the breath, as the breath is experienced in many places, from nose to back to pelvis. Some traditions get particularly picky about where you notice the breath, so if you want to give one of those a try, don't let my bias towards finding it wherever it is hold you back. When I am fully engaged with bending the mind to this exercise of following the many rich and varying sensations of breathing, there is little room to be lost in thought. I have found this to be a very useful practice for developing moment-to-moment concentration and penetrating the illusion of continuity. In this last exercise, I take on thoughts directly. I know that the sensations that make up thoughts can reveal the truth of the three characteristics, so I have no fear of them. Instead, I regard them as more glorious opportunities for gaining insight. Again, sitting quietly in a quiet place with eyes closed, I turn the mind to the thought stream. However, rather than paying attention to the content as I usually do, I pay attention to the ultimate nature of the numerous sensations that make up thoughts. Impermanence. I may even make the thoughts, which are typically occurring in the general region of my head, more and more intense just to get a good look at them. It is essential to try to perceive how you experience thoughts at the sensate level. Otherwise, you will likely flounder in their content. What do thoughts feel like? Where do they occur? How big are they? What do they look like, smell like, taste like, sound like, feel like? How long do they last? What are their edges? Only take on this practice if you are willing to try to work at the level of trying to discern what thoughts actually are, rather than what they mean, represent, or imply. If we begin to explore carefully, we will realize that thoughts are made of many types of sensations, sounds, sights, physical feelings, even tastes and smells. But they will often, though not always, be associated with one predominant sense store. If my thoughts are more auditory, as in inner talk, I begin by trying to perceive each syllable of the current thought, and then each syllable's beginning and ending. If they are visual, as in mental images, I try to perceive every instant in which a mental image presents itself. If they seem physical, such as a memory of a movement or bodily sensation, I try to perceive exactly how long each little sensation of this memory lasts. This sort of investigation can be fairly easy to do, and yet is quite powerful. Things can also get odd quickly when doing this practice, but I don't worry about that. Sometimes thoughts can begin to sound like the auditory strobing section of the song Crimson and Clover, where it sounds like they are standing at a spinning microphone. Sometimes the images that arise internally can begin to flash and flicker. Sometimes our very sense of attention can begin to strobe. This is the point. The sensations that imply a mind and mental processes are discontinuous and fleeting. Again, this practice requires steadiness and determination, as well as precision. There is no time to be lost in the content of the thoughts, as I am trying too hard to be clear about the beginning and ending of each little flicker, squawk, and pulse that makes up a thought. This can be an especially fun practice when difficult thoughts that have sticky or emotionally heavy content for me, are distracting from a physical sensation. I can turn on them, break them down into meaningless little blips, little vibrations of suchness, and then they don't have the power to cause me any trouble. They just scatter like confetti. They are seen as they are, small, quick, and harmless. They have a message to convey, but then they are gone. When I am done with this exercise, I return to physical objects and their arising and passing. However, I have found taking on the sensations that make up thoughts to be another very useful exercise for developing momentary concentration and penetrating the illusion of continuity. It doesn't matter if they are good thoughts or bad thoughts, as all mental sensations are also dripping with ultimate truth that is just waiting to be discovered, and thus I can proceed in my investigation with confidence, regardless of what arises. Whether our illusions are penetrated using physical sensations or mental sensations is completely irrelevant. But from another point of view, it is really good to be skilled at doing both, which comes with practice. Hopefully, these exercises will give you some idea about how we might practice understanding impermanence. Impermanence is a quality whose clear perception leads to wisdom. So just understanding this again and again can be enough to drum it into our thick heads, debunk the illusion of continuity, and once this is drummed into our thick heads, we are freer. This can be a subtle business, so be patient and persevere. Remember all three trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Following flickering sensations and understanding the other two characteristics of suffering and no-self that they manifest can be a powerful and direct cause for deep insights and awakenings. For 5 years of my practice, I was mostly a one-technique freak, and that technique was noticing how sensations flicker. I would do it as often as I could. That is, whenever I didn't have to be doing something that required concentration on the specifics of my life. I would be riding an elevator, just trying to see when I could feel each foot, or lying down to sleep and noticing how many times I could experience the sensations of my breath in each second. I also tried to notice this aspect of things for every single sensation that occurred during my formal practice. I used lots of objects, usually those that were presenting strongly at the time, and would use some variations on the above techniques as well as some others to keep me from getting stuck that I will mention shortly. But the aspect of my world that I tried to notice, things flickering, was nearly always the same. I found that by making a commitment to understanding one of the fundamentals of insight practices, I made quick progress and gained the insights I was looking for.